this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. If you can imagine a world where the access to a specific tool did not exist, that we are completely and totally dependent upon nowadays, it kind of leaves you scratching your head as to how in the world did we ever get any crime solved. Well, I'm reflecting back to, I don't know, probably the early start of my career, and I didn't have access to modern technology, but the one fail-safe that we could always kind of, fall back on were fingerprints. Now, we did blood typing, those sorts of things, but, prior to Sir Alec Jeffreys' application of DNA, I think it was in 84 in Great Britain, DNA just was not a thing. We knew about DNA. We knew that we could probably understand our genetic code, but we hadn't quite cracked that nut yet. But in 1978, the minds of families were not on what Sir Alec Jeffreys would do 6 years later. Their minds were on a tragic double homicide that occurred in Massachusetts, ending the lives of a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old. And until recently, those cases have remained unsolved. That's no longer the case. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, sometimes, and I know that you probably, just because I've worked in forensic science and have been around all the scientific whiz bangs and those sorts of things, and people are really impressed with that. I bet you can reflect back to your days in radio and think about using reel-to-reel, having to take a record album and spin it backwards. I've seen them do that to get to the top of the song, which I was always fascinated. I couldn't do it.
Really?
I would. If I was under that kind of pressure in a radio studio, I'd look like Lucy and Ethel trying to stuff bonbons down my shirt because they're on the assembly line. I couldn't do it. I don't know how you guys did it, but that's the way of the world, isn't it? Us in our generation, we look back at a time long gone and we think, wow, it seemed kind of simple then, but nowadays, you look back and how in the world did we accomplish anything? But we certainly did in a more analog world, didn't we?
Yes. And, it's amazing when I saw this story. Actually, when you told me about it, the first thing I thought of was so often we get caught up in the technology that we have today that we don't realize sometimes that something as analog as a fingerprint is enough to solve a crime. We think you've got to have DNA from blood and semen and hair fibers. And, we have to have all of that and let the computer technology readout tell us who did what, when really those are just tools that are used to solve crimes. And fingerprints are still an effective way of proving somebody was in a particular place at a particular time when a particular thing went down. And if that fingerprint is in blood matching the victims, well, now you've got three things tying you to there. You've got their blood, you, and your fingerprint. Beat that in court.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And look, when fingerprints uh, were first, I don't know, utilized in what we would refer to back then as police science. This goes all the way back to the 1890s, and a gentleman that I encourage everyone that has an interest in forensic science to look up, Sir Edward Henry, and he developed what was referred to as the Henry system of fingerprint identification. And actually, it's the Henry classification system still used today, and it's based upon a number of points of identification that make a fingerprint unique to a specific individual. With Sir Henry, he was faced with, as you can imagine, he lived in London. He had been he was appointed actually as the Inspector General of Police in Bengal, which was then India, and of course it was ruled over by the British. And do you realize back then, we think about India today, that the population density, it was equally as populous. Well, not equally as populous, but it was still densely populated, even compared to a place like London. And so when he is tasked with this idea of trying to specifically identify individuals, he came to the conclusion that there had to have been a way and to uniquely kind of loop around and say, okay, this particular latent print perhaps is left behind by a suspect. And the first place to do this was that everybody that came into custody of his office, they would be fingerprinted. And now it seems kind of, I don't know, it seems kind of passé, I guess. But back then, this was something that was cutting edge. Well, because, you had to go out and shake the trees before then, burn the shoe leather in order to get any kind of confession out of someone.
It's interesting, Joe, that what he went through building a database of fingerprints is the exact same thing we're still going through now with DNA. Because if you've got DNA of a possible suspect at a crime scene, unless their DNA is in the system, you're going to run it and nothing's going to come back. Now, we have, over the last several years, and in particular on this show, in the last year of doing shows that Authram has been able to break open using genetic genealogy, which means I don't have to have Joe Scott Morgan's DNA in the system. I could have a great grandpa of your bloodline and match that up somehow by building a family tree. It's not easy as we make it sound, but there's that connection that now has been built, which, to be honest with you, it really scares me in a lot of ways.
It does.
The libertarian in me gets really scared,
Well, yeah, you have that bit, that does terrify people. And of course, famously, I think recently, if I'm not mistaken, 23andMe, has been bought out by, let's just say, a large concern that's out there. And that really scares people. And I think that probably it should. The big promise was that no one would have access to, let's face it, to your life code.
Right.
A lot of people suspect and are worried about, well, if they plug my DNA in, it's not so much about some kind of crime I've committed, but what if they're looking for some kind of pattern or disease or predisposition disease? Well, insurance companies get their hands on that, to say, okay, you're not going to be qualified for some kind of coverage because you have a predisposition to, I don't know, colon cancer or heart disease or COPD or whatever the case might be. And so, yeah, rightly so. I think people are worried about that. Not so much with fingerprints, because it doesn't necessarily have encoding in it, but it is unique to individuals. Here's a little a little ditty that I'll pass.
You're just trying to scare me, Joe. That's all you're doing. You're getting the paranoia, conspiracy nut Dave really rankled right now. Just throwing it out there.
Well, here's the really unique thing. Allegedly, actually, Frontline did a series on this a few years back. Maybe it was in 2010. It kind of paralleled the big report that came out with the Obama administration relative to the needs of forensic practice. And there was this Frontline program that came out. Did you know this old adage about no two fingerprints are the same?
Mm-hmm.
We've heard that over and over. Did you know that there's never truly been a pure empirical scientific study to prove or disprove that? It's just this kind of assumption that hangs out there in the air. Now, likelihood is that no two truly match,
right.
But you have a case like, a few years ago where you had the Madrid train bombing.
Oh, yeah.
Where you had I think it was a plastic grocery bag that was found at the site of that, and there was a fingerprint on that plastic bag. And that fingerprint was actually linked to a guy that lived in the northwestern part of the United States. And he's an American that had actually recently converted to Islam.
Oh, man.
And he was an attorney, and he was under suspicion for this. And as it turns out, I'm probably going to get this wrong. I might be misremembering. I think that the actual perpetrator turned out to be a guy from Tunisia, if I'm not mistaken. And here's the other thing. Fingerprint examination is certainly a vaunted technical skill. I would not want to do it because it's so tedious. I don't have a mind where I can sit. If you just imagine if you are a print examiner and you're sitting at a draftsman's board, like you see a cartoonist sit at, or, a person that drafts up, and having to wear magnifying glasses and look out for every bit of minutia in these prints that you're examining, it would get really, really tedious. In that particular case, I think they had 5 independent individuals that examined the print, and they all came to the same conclusion that it was tied back to this guy in the northwestern part of the United States. And as it turned out, it wasn't.
Wow.
And so, and
So
these are 5 experts that had looked at it. Yeah. And but as, for, I don't know, I guess 8 or 9 months, his hiney was really biting the seat.
Right. I bet.
Because he thought that, he was done for.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine being connected to a train bombing in Spain?
Be pretty bad. Through a fingerprint, through fingerprint analysis.
Through fingerprint.
But now we have everything's computerized, and we have AI, and we have a lot of other things going on in the world of fingerprint analysis. I would imagine that if we were wise, recognizing that we haven't proved this as a fact, it's an assumed fact that no two fingerprints are alike, that once we had a fingerprint match, then we would go a step further. We would look for other ways of matching up the individual with other possibilities. And if we don't have it, then get a good defense attorney and start arguing that you found 2 snowflakes just alike. So here you go. I mean,
and that's a great analogy. No two snowflakes are the same. But even Herbert Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover saw, even before the FBI became the FBI, and he was kind of running the show back then, he understood the utility of fingerprints. And there's some great old black and white images, if you ever get a chance to take a look, of the big card room that the FBI had. And if you'll imagine, you remember going, and I know you do, going to college, and we worked in the library on the Dewey Decimal System, where we had several rows of card indices that were in there, and you'd have to go through it. That's how we used to do our research before we had electronic research.
I tried to explain it to my kids about writing an actual term paper, what it was like.
It's rather tedious. Yeah. Well, the data that was coming in from these cards that were submitted to the feds, where it became like this major collection point with the FBI, in this huge room, they actually had card pullers, people that would go up and down the road, and they're wearing roller skates. And because it was so vast, to quickly kind of do this is before any kind of automation. And, you jump forward, and now those cards, going back, became the modern cards that we have, and now they're in a digital phase, where you can roll your print, over an electronic pad, and it goes into the system. And of course, AFIS was developed, and it's the automatic fingerprint index system. And so you can pick up these things. And I think you make an interesting point, Dave, with AI. I think that going back, if AI is applied to this underlying supposition that no two prints are the same, and you put AI on the case, wouldn't that be fascinating to see if through AI, if that theory could be proven finally? But with our cases, I don't want to be disrespectful of the dead. Our cases that we're talking about today from back in 1978, things were not automated to that degree. And look, just because you find a print at the scene does not, in fact, mean that you are going to find a print in the system. And let me ask you this, and I don't want to know anything about your personal history, but have you ever been fingerprinted for a job? If you go in for a job, you'll get fingerprinted, and they will kind of retain that card there. That happened to me multiple times. Anytime I got it. Well, anytime you go in the military, you work for any public institution, school teachers are printed, all these sorts of things. But that doesn't mean it's going to be uploaded to AFIS, okay, where you have this database of known fingerprints that are out there. And if you've got somebody just like DNA that you mentioned, Dave, they're not in the CODIS system, all you got at the end of the day is merely a fingerprint.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Wow, I was thinking back, Dave. I think 1978, let's see, who do we have? The Bee Gees were all the rage. We're just coming out of disco.
What, 1978?
Yeah,
no,
1978.
You're ahead.
Right.
No, disco.
I'm ahead.
Yeah,
really?
disco is still. Remember okay, just to give you an idea.
You're not going to start singing Disco Duck, are you? Please don't do that.
Rick Dees and his cast of idiots. It's amazing how many radio stations Rick Dees worked at that everybody says, yeah, I used to work with him. And at the time, he was in Memphis when Disco Duck became a hit.
Yeah,
we could play this game all day, but let's not. In 1979.
Let's don't. I'll lose.
Okay, it was in the summer of 1979 at Comiskey Field in Chicago when they had the Disco Sucks concert and blew up the disco stuff records.
Yeah.
And at the exact same time, the Bee Gees were on their first world tour in 3 years, and they were at the Oakland Alameda Coliseum where they had sold out and people were standing in line still hoping to buy scalp tickets. So that was 1979. So in 1978, you're thinking about a time where disco was on the radio and was really still flying high, man. YMCA and In the Navy and the soundtrack for Saturday Night Fever probably had Grease, that soundtrack as well, because John Travolta was really hot. But in that time in 1978, I looked at pictures of the crime scene. It took me some going back and looking because I was trying to picture the vehicles we're talking about. And in this particular case, November 19, 1978, police find a 1967 Dodge pickup truck. It's green. It's parked in a rest area on Route 5, and the driver's side window of the truck is damaged. There is blood seen inside and outside of the truck, but there's no victims in the truck, Joe. There's blood, and I'm guessing when they say damage to the window was blasted out. But this 1977 Dodge pickup truck, it was only 11 years old, but it looked like about 50 years old compared. It was a beat up truck. This truck was it was not in good shape.
It kind of looks like the truck that we drew when we were kids and we were just learning to draw.
It does.
It kind of looks like that. The sides are caved in. So, here's an interesting kind of consideration here when you're working a crime scene and you have what might be considered to be, I don't know, kind of a messy crime scene. You have to ask yourself this question: what I'm seeing at the crime scene, is this something that existed prior to the events in question, or is this something new? And you have to assess that physical evidence at the scene. Now, listen, if you've got glass blown out of a window, perhaps, and it's a big deal as to whether or not it's blown out or blown in, you probably know that this is something that has recently happened. Now all of the other damage, because anytime you have a vehicle that's related to some kind of horrible crime, you wonder if maybe another vehicle was used to facilitate the crime. Maybe they were run off the road or forced to stop. If there's any kind of contact points on the vehicle, with paint from another vehicle. So just because an old truck might have a bullet hole in it doesn't necessarily mean that bullet hole is related to that specific event. And you would go in and actually, and I've had to do this before, along with the crime scene tech, is assess the defect in the truck. And let's just say, for instance, you've got an old bullet hole in the door or the side panels. If there's, say, a deposition of rust in that area, some kind of oxidation that's taking place, that this is not something that's fresh. Now, if you've got freshly blown out paint, say in one of the side panels, and the windows are cracked in or cracked out, that this is probably something new, Dave.
The amazing part of all of this, Joe, is that as you're looking at the truck and you see all the damage there, you have to back up to the beginning of it and figure out how they even were called to the scene, because this is one of those times where a rest area is always an odd place, Joe, whenever I hear that in a story, because you've got people who look ahead to the rest area because they got to go to a bathroom break or whatever. But November in Massachusetts, I'm thinking it's pretty cold. So
it is very cold.
And you're talking about November 19th, which is going to be different than November 1st. I know that in terms of being cold. This is going to be a chilly night. So you're not going to be there parking, I wouldn't think, doing a little lover's lane thing at the rest area. But
I wouldn't think so. And, when you look at the actual truck from the crime scene, there's snow on the ground.
Right.
And, you're looking at this and that, I've been to Massachusetts in the winter, and trust me, I love Boston. It's one of my favorite places. It's not a place that I want to hang out when the weather turns cold,
right,
because it can be absolutely miserable up there, Dave.
And that's the thing that gets me about this entire story is that you've got a young couple, Joe. Theresa is 18, Mark is 20. And we have a truck where you've got blood all in the area, in the section where you said it's not like trucks today have multiple. You can have 3 rows of seats now in a pickup truck. This didn't have that. This was, you've got one area to sit. You can put 3 people on the bench seat. That's what I'm looking at. And there's nobody in there, but off to the side near a guardrail, there are 2 bodies. They have been obviously, that's the wrong thing to say. I guess when I think of seeing blood all over a certain area and I see 2 bodies, I'm thinking, just putting 2 and 2 together, that those 2 bodies are somehow associated with the blood in that truck. But because of the damage, you're actually not looking at this as a lover's quarrel that went crazy and I shot myself and then I shot her and then shot myself. It's not that setup at all.
No, because, in order to facilitate that, well, more than likely you'd have to have a weapon at the scene.
Right. And we don't have that.
You'd have to have a firearm, and you have no weapon at the scene. And I've worked a lot of what we refer to as murder-suicides. And they're in the news, like, I don't know, it seems like every other weekend you have one of these horrible events. Of course, it only makes it through like 1 or 2 cycles of the news. Right. But it does happen. And so when you have an individual or individuals that are found, say, for instance, at a at a rest area, they can be very sketchy locations. And particularly back in the 70s, they really were. They were renowned, many of them, depending upon where they were located, as sex pickup areas. You would have truckers that would pull in there. You would have individual males that would pull in looking for company, perhaps with it could either be the male or female sex they were trying to engage with. And you never know. And plus, here's the daunting task, Dave. When you're it's not like being in your driveway, okay? It's not. When you're at a roadside stop like this is an open area where anybody could come and go, and they're going to be gone in a matter of seconds after they've perpetrated a crime. They're back on the road. And back then, we did not have CCTV everywhere. I mean, they had it, but it was bad, right? Really bad. And the thought that we would actually have it there at some lonesome roadside stop is slim and none, I think.
Well, and that's what we have. And I was looking at all the possible ways a police officer would end up at a rest area and find, the bodies. And I thought I was looking for a phone call. Did anybody see something and call police? I was going to assume they had 911, but even before 911, it was, dial 0 for the police, get me the police. And so we don't have any call like that I'm aware of. What we do have is a police officer out on his normal route and, checking the rest area. Not an uncommon occurrence. And he sees the truck. One look at the truck, as you're driving by and your lights hit the truck, you're going to see a blown out window and you're going to see blood spatter all over the inside of this truck, which is exactly what he saw. He doesn't see any bodies inside the truck. And as he gets looking, he finds the bodies, both of them. They're not laid over the guardrail. I misread it the first time, and I was thinking somebody had draped the bodies over the guardrail like as a show of some kind of weird thing, but it wasn't. They were actually laid near the guardrail.
And I think it was kind of a depressed area. And isn't that fascinating? You can learn a lot, I think, by the way, and I've talked about this before, but it's something that I kind of preach. It's foundational relative to death investigation. How a body is treated and manipulated in the postmortem state says a lot, I think, about the goals of the perpetrator, okay? Because if you're looking to hide a body and you take time to hide a body, even two, that is precious time ticking off the clock where you're trying to put as much distance between yourself and the event that has taken place. That the fact that an individual would take that amount of time to extricate these two young people from the vehicle, which I believe that this event took place in the vehicle, and hide them along the way says a lot about this person. Because look, I mean, how many times do you ever look in cars when you pull off at a rest stop? I really don't. I'll notice a place to park. I don't pay close attention. Now I pay closer attention because Kim and I travel with our dogs. And so we find a rest area. We have to get out where people commonly get out with their dogs and take them back on a trail. Now I'll look around there to see, first off, if there are other dogs, and I'll wait until they're gone. Or if I'll see anybody that's kind of sketchy, because most of that time, those back areas are, they're kind of, look, it's not a place I would commonly want to hang out at night, all right, because they're quite terrifying, even by today's standards, because the world's a crazy place. You don't know who's going to be back there. But do you ever actually, when you're driving in, pay attention? So the police officer, who this would have been his beat, right. And this goes back to your original point. He's driving through. I'm sure that he's encountered all kinds of things in this rest area over a period of time. He's probably found people sleeping in their cars, which you can do, but he's also found people engaging in, let's just say, less than savory activities in these locations. And he's the only person that's there that's kind of a constant, other than the attendant in the rest area, if they're even there. Dave, this young couple, they were essentially, I think, last known to be alive at about 12:30 a.m.
At a friend's party.
Of course, Yeah, and Theresa Marcoux, who is 18, and Mark Harnish, who is 20, they had been at a party. Well, if I've got two individuals that are missing and I find their truck in this case, at a rest stop, I want to know about this party they were at.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know because, as you know, and I'm sure you've experienced, as have I, if the libations get to flowing at one of these things get out of hand, and you have people that might very well lose their temper, had something started there, had something initiated there, where they were followed and maybe trapped in this location and eventually killed.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsay Vaughn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
I think any reasonable person would say, well, Morgan, how do you know the bodies were removed from the vehicle other than the fact that they're not there? Well, we'd look for things like when you have multiple gunshot wounds, which is what we're dealing with here, and also a commingling of blood. The police believe that these two victims were pushed or were placed or forced to be on the passenger side of the vehicle. So as they're shot and they begin to bleed in these areas right there, when subject is moved, if the door is open, that blood that's contained on their bodies and maybe the surrounding area is still wet. It hasn't congealed at all, which blood actually does, particularly in colder weather like this. You would have droplets that are falling, passively dropping to the ground. And then unless the perpetrator picks them up in their arms, my suspicion is that you will have drag marks that will lead to the location where they were. And again, this goes to the involvement of an individual in this case where their purpose to hide the body. But here's the other thing, Dave, is that you've got a perpetrator that's screwing around inside the cab, touching the bodies. Oh, and by the way, touching surfaces within the cab of the vehicle. If they don't have gloved hands, guess what they're going to leave behind? Well, potentially fingerprints. And isn't it interesting that little bit, that decision that individual made by screwing around inside of this vehicle after he has slaughtered these two young people, they knew that they had a fingerprint, but Dave, they had no idea who it belonged to.
Well, and having a fingerprint in 1978 and not having what we have now technologically, if they're local, or if the fingerprint rather could be matched up locally with somebody right there, you can actually get a suspect. But this suspect didn't leave the gun. He or she didn't leave the gun or anything else. We have the two victims. We got blood. We do know that they were last seen at a party at 12:30 in the morning. We do know that law enforcement did walk through the neighborhood and knock on doors, and did find ear witness saying they heard the muffled sound of gunshots around 4 a.m. So we got a 3.5 hour window between the time they left the party and the time that the person heard the shooter. Police arrived after that time, obviously, so this is really getting into be a weird investigation from the very beginning because you don't have a gun. They didn't even have bullets after the fact, after the autopsy. You saw where they found, they did have evidence after the autopsy. They had the bullets, right?
Yes. Yeah. And, that would, if you have no spent casings at the scene, that would give you pause to one of two things. First off, is the caliber that you recover at the autopsy, is it consistent with a semi-automatic handgun? Well, if it is, then that means that you didn't find any spent brass at the scene, brass that has been ejected. So Are you dealing with somebody that went back and picked up the brass? Are you dealing with somebody that's carrying a revolver, which, you're going to carry the spent cartridges away with you inside of the chamber of the revolver? And let me jump back just one quick second, and I plan on doing cases involving motor vehicles related to homicides, because there's such a dynamic here. Did you know that if you have someone that is, let's say someone's in the driver's seat, okay, of a vehicle, or the passenger seat. Well, if you're in the passenger seat, the right side of your face is going to be immediately adjacent to the passenger side window. I mean, it pretty much goes without saying. And conversely, you're going to have the driver, who will be the left aspect of their face, will be immediately adjacent to the driver's side window. Dave, you want to hear something really interesting about these side windows on vehicles when they fracture? Well, they're safety glass. And so when they fracture, that glass comes apart in cubes. And so if you have enough velocity, all right, when someone is either impacted by that glass flying through the air, maybe as a result of a gunshot, or maybe as a result of being T-boned, or whatever the case might be, you get these little right angle lacerations on the face. Isn't that fascinating? And they're married up with this cubing of the glass that takes place. And I actually worked a case where a guy took a car off into a canal, and the vehicle inverted in the canal, and he unstrapped. Well, they weren't strapped in. He pulled his buddy over into the driver's side of the vehicle. He swam out, left his buddy there, and his buddy had dicing injuries on the right aspect of his face. And we knew that he had been moved as a result of that. He tried to put his buddy in the driver's seat, is what it came down to. And so that's one of the things that we can look at anytime you have busted out glass in a vehicle. And I suspect that they probably took a look at that. I'd love to know what other elements kind of flew toward the body. Did they find glass that was embedded in the clothing? But what we do know is that you're dealing with multiple gunshot wounds for both of these victims. And we've got a time frame, and this goes back to what we talked about earlier. They leave this party, and what was that time again? It was like 12:15, 12:30 a.m. Mm-hmm. They leave the party, and the neighbor hears gunshots it's an ear witness to this. They hear gunshots at 4 a.m. Mm-hmm. Well, Dave, I really wonder, were they using this roadside area as maybe the potential for to go parking, if you will, to sit there, and then all of a sudden, like a bolt out of the blue, you've got this creature that kind of climbs out of the darkness, and for whatever reason decides to end both of their lives.
Right. And that we're talking 1 year after the Son of Sam murders in New York that had been all the rage and all the news, where lovers' lanes were getting shot up all over in the boroughs in New York City.
The 44 caliber killer is the other name that they applied. And again, he was using a revolver, Dave.
Yes.
He was using a revolver in those cases. Yeah.
And so we've got a lot going on here, but ultimately you got the fingerprint and nothing. It just kind of sits there. All years later, come about 2001. So you mentioned applying for a job and having to do fingerprints. And in 2000, a man is applying to get a taxi cab license, and he has to give his fingerprint. Right. Now, this is 22 years after the murders of a young couple. It's an unsolved murder, and this guy does his fingerprints. Nothing happens. I don't know if he got the job or not. But lo and behold, somebody's working the cold cases.
Yes.
And so that thumbprint or fingerprint that was up, now it is uploaded. Okay. It was turned in by when he applied for the license, and it was now uploaded. All it took was that cold case getting kicked back into the system and having the numbers run. And lo and behold, they got a hit. They get a hit on this, Joe. And I'm thinking the guy got away with murder. And if he doesn't apply for that license in 2000, he's getting away with it for his whole life.
Forever and ever. Amen. And here's the thing. I'm not saying, no one misconstrue what I'm saying here. Cold case squads were a thing back in the early 2000s. Okay. They were a thing. However, as you well know, we even can think about our dear friend Cheryl McCullum, who runs Cold Case Institute, has Zone 7 podcast. I urge everybody to listen to it. Those little details that you collect out there at the scene, you never know what will happen in order to link you back. And so as we have moved through time, I mean, let's think about it. We personally know somebody that actually has an institute for cold case, and she solved cases. Now you've got cops that are on the inside, and they have whole cold case squads that are working, at local level, state police level, where they're going back and they're re-examining evidence. And it just so happens that some detective out there, he goes to the pile, he looks over there, and and it's generally a pile. You have these files that are kind of quadrant off or everything else. These are cold cases. They'll be held in some particular spot. I think I'll choose this one and take a look at it. And lo and behold, there's a latent print that's contained in there. And he's like, well, this is back from 78.
Right.
Let me see if I can plug this puppy in and get this thing resolved. And oh my gosh, Dave, he struck gold.
Big time.
What are the odds? What are the odds that this guy would walk in, grab that card, and plug it in, and he gets a hit on this thing now, these many years later?
I was thinking to myself on this, Joe, that there's no real DNA. And when we think of these nowadays, we think of DNA, of them running on a cold case, and we have the genetic genealogy, and we're solving a lot of those cases day in and out. This is old school stuff here. This is an old school fingerprint that they held on to. And as they were trying to, the part about this that does, it hurts my heart for families who feel like they've been left out because their case was never solved. And they think that they were just forgotten. They're not forgotten. It's just a matter of time and ability. And these cold cases that are getting solved now, it doesn't change anything except give you an answer for who did it. And sometimes that's enough for you to be able to sleep at night. But in this particular case, Joe, I had to go back and remember the person that they arrested in this case was only 25 at the time. He was 25 years old at the time he allegedly committed this double homicide. And now he's an old man.
Yeah.
He's lived his entire life, Joe. He's 71 years old now. Timothy Jolie.
Timothy Jolie, cooling his heels down in Clearwater, Florida, which arguably is one of the most lovely places in Florida that you could live, thinking that the dust had cleared probably. He's gone on with his life. He doesn't think that anybody is going to come after him. And I got to tell you, Dave, tip of the cap to the authorities in Hampton, Massachusetts, and the DA for pursuing this case, because they wound up charging this guy with double homicide. He's looking at 50 years in prison. Now he's being charged. He has not been convicted at this time. But Dave, we're coming to you, my friends, hot off the presses here. This is something that they have just hooked this guy up on very, very recently. And they're going to pursue charges in this, and they're going to pursue a trial. And this is, for those of you guys that don't know where this is located, it's immediately adjacent to Springfield, Massachusetts. And, I can wax very, I don't know if poetic is the term. It's sad because their lives were ended there in that old beat up truck adjacent to this dirty, filthy roadside stop. Their bodies drug out of that truck after they had both been shot down, treated like less than human. And there they were left in that cold, cold air that night. There was no one to know what had ever happened. Dave, some of their closest relatives have probably passed on many, many years ago. those people that they spent Thanksgiving with and Christmas, those people that were at that party that night, I bet a lot of those people have just vanished, have gone away. And you really wonder. You sit there and you think, is there any memory? Well, now there is. And the person that allegedly perpetrated this crime is going to be held to account. He is going to be taken and he is going to be charged. He is going to be prosecuted and potentially convicted. Timothy Jolie, if he is convicted, my estimation, after 46 years, he's going to die in prison. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.